So we're going to have a panel session now. We've got about half an hour for it. And this is about the power of intelligence with the world's smartest supply chains and gaining a competitive edge. It is, as Andrew said, we basically got a Slido for this. This is your chance to ask questions and then join in the debate if you really want to. So that would be awesome if you could. It's right there. I'll be checking it, and so we'll be asking as many questions from you as we possibly can. The new normal of market volatility has arrived. It's sort of inflationary pressures, geopolitical and pandemic impacts, the material and product variability are top of mind for every supply chain and procurement leader. This is about learning how the world's smartest supply chains are gaining a competitive edge, using robust insights and intelligence to proactively manage risk, generate cost savings, and accelerate innovation and time to market. I'm going to bring up two experts in this field, Eve Abensour, and Rajesh Kalindindi, founder and CEO of LeverData. So Eve is the Director of Global Sourcing and Digital Transformation at Technicolor Connected Home. She joined in December 2021, so it hasn't been there very long. But she's responsible for sourcing, systems management, digital technology roadmap, the process excellence and supplier sustainability, sourcing data management, and supply chain operations. Rajesh is a seasoned supply chain exec with demonstrated performance managing multi-billion-dollar spend portfolios in the tech industry. He founded LeverData to accelerate procurement transformation, utilizing the power of data and AI to create competitive advantage for enterprises. He's known and respected as supply chain visionary and a thought leader with keen understanding of the global supply chain business and technology trends. So I'd like you to please welcome both of them to the stage. Eve and Rajesh, please come and join me.
Hello, Jeremy, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks, guys. So we've got quite a bit to get through. So what I'd like you to do is just, I've given a potted history there. Give us a little sort of background on your career and what drew you, Eve, possibly first, if you could, what drew you to supply chain and procurement in particular?
Great, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm Eve Abensour. As Jeremy said, I'm part of the Technicolor Connected Home, to be soon Ventiva. I'm responsible for the sourcing transformation, and I'm doing 25 years of procurement across industries, starting with automotive, then aerospace, then petrochemical, then different roles, but always in procurement. And I have an engineering background, so effectively you could really wonder why I'm here. It's because when I graduated from my engineering, I said, I want something exciting, something where each day I don't have the same day. So really, what this challenge is about, chaotic, transformation became really later, but even with those roles, I have to learn that I've never been bored. I'm always in the heart of the decisions of the company. We are always in the heart of the innovation, and we are always driving the company to the next level. So that makes me my passion every day.
And Rajesh, for you, what drew you to this? I mean, you've been doing this a long time.
Well, I think procurement was pretty exciting for me because it was one of those functions that really had material impact to the organization, whether it's around, driving cost savings to reduce, or improve gross margins, or helping, driving revenue by mitigating supply disruptions. The cool thing about that job is the impact you have on it is very measurable, and that allowed you to see how you have progressed and demonstrated value to the company. So I spent quite a bit of years as a supply chain practitioner and as a procurement executive, and then I started LeverData when I realized that the function is handicapped by several things, which is access to information that's of high velocity, and we'll talk about this more, and also the ability to really increase speed and velocity of decisions. And that's why I founded LeverData very specifically with the intention of helping create competitive advantage for organizations through their procurement function.
Great, great. We're going to come back to that. I like that phrase about handicapped by access to information, and we're going to come back to that in a minute anyway. I think a good place to start would be looking at how we've talked today already in other formats about how the life of supply chain professionals has changed dramatically over the past few years in particular, and we all know why, obviously, with the pandemic and other factors as well. Eve, let's start with you. So let's have your view of what the biggest challenges have been in these past few years and why that's the case.
Okay, so in Technicolor Connected Home, we are producing customer premise equipment, which is, of course, to deliver our network service providers the best boxes for innovation on Android TV and broadband and video to really innovate on the customer experience from entertainment and connectivity. So we are a huge consumer of electronics.
Right.
So being a huge consumer of electronics, the pandemic has really given us a toughest time in terms of component shortages first.
Yeah.
Component shortages, supply chain disruptions was lead time extension, huge pressure on cost, of course, customer premium costs that we could not pass through the customer because of logistic congestions and the change in the trade policy and restrictions of those, plant shutdowns, what can I say, the workforce shortages and the labor intricacy that were missing at the time you need that, and of course, unreliability of the demand.
Yeah.
So that was the biggest challenge that we have to face on a very daily basis. Our buyers were spending time to chase parts.
And to what extent were you prepared for some of those eventualities? No one could see everything that was coming in the last couple of years, but were there any things with regards to your department that were in place that mitigated some of those challenges that you faced that you just listed there? Or did you have to start from scratch and go, okay?
No, of course, before the pandemic, the supply chain transformation started already.
Right.
Because we were always aware that we need to transform short-term planning to long-term planning. That's one. Secondly, to make sure that we have a dynamic, real-time execution of the forecast, that we can have also the full end-to-end integration and supply chain visibility through our tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers. So we already knew that we had that, but the pandemic has just accelerated that awareness that it's not enough that just to have the risk visible. It's that we need to go deeper and have a plan ready to mitigate that risk.
We're seeing that in so many sectors, aren't we? It's all about acceleration rather than transformation in a sense of what actually came through. Rajesh, was it any different for you from your slightly different perspective, and obviously with regard to what was difficult in the last couple of years for what you do?
I think, frankly, pretty much everyone were pretty much caught with their pants down when this happened. I mean, it's all the big binders of business continuity plans that they put together had to be just thrown out because this was the mother of all disruptions. You had, you didn't know which node was going to break. And so literally, I would say traditional procurement was tested to its limit. And so this is, the first foundational issue was you had a visibility challenge. It's like, okay, I don't know where the next issue is going to happen. So at the tier 1 or several tiers underneath it, or any place in the flow of goods. And so that itself was a challenge for companies to go after and assess. The next piece is how do they react as these things started cascading fast enough across every part, every supplier. And in the past, procurement used to focus very much on the top spend strategic suppliers just because there's too many suppliers and parts to deal with. And that didn't work anymore because, a capacitor costing less than a penny was bringing down lines. And so, again, I think companies have to start thinking more broadly around how they cover, all these suppliers and parts. How do they get to the right depth of information as well to make decisions faster?
Moving on from that, though, you've given a number of interviews recently where you talk about the new normal of volatility in the sector. like the number of events that impact the supply chain. If you could tell us more about the shift you see here, and from other leading supply chain companies, that's probably be the most useful, I think. Because you talked about there how everyone had, like, how it just hit everybody. And so I guess this is just moving forward a little bit and analysing how much of this will go back to what it was before and how much it is irrevocably changed.
Yeah, I think today everybody would agree that volatility is the new normal, and it continues to surprise companies as the next challenge, whether it's geopolitical or it's something related to commodity pricing or things that come around the corner. And so one of the key things that becomes very important is figuring out how you have rapid response capability associated with that. And if you think about rapid response, and you have to do that across thousands of parts and hundreds of suppliers, or even more in complex organizations, it's tough. And then you got a lot of varying sets of information, data attributes that you got to look through and make decisions to see whether this is impacting your portfolio and how do you take action associated with it. So humans can't do that at that pace and at that scale. And so this is where I think, again, traditional procurement is having to really step up and leverage the power of digital capabilities, data and AI capabilities, where they have to sense these opportunities and risks in a continuous manner. It's not episodal alone, but they have to do it proactively in a continuous manner, and then figure out how they're going to change that into a specific decision or an action associated with solving for that. And so that's what we're facing today. And so if you think about it, you're moving from a cadence-based engagement to a continuous sourcing engagement today as a result.
Perhaps you could tell us, relating to that, there's the other side as well. What about the uncertainty of customer demand? Because it's not just supply, it's demand as well, isn't it?
Yeah, so to just bounce back on what Rajesh mentioned, when we talk about new normal of volatility, I think the relationship of supply to demand has been reinverted. That means it's now the supply that conducts the demand.
Right.
Why before, there was a customer asking something and you just go and execute. Now you are proposing to the customer what you can offer him. Okay, so that means you have to analyze with all your dynamic supply chain in real-time execution which inventory you have from end to end, from your suppliers to your tier 2, and to tell to the suppliers, to the customer, sorry, we're going to shift your demand and your offer to what we can provide you at this time, at the right place, at the right time. And we're going to talk about that later on this interview, on this panel, sorry. The only thing that we haven't talked about new normal volatility, we are forgetting the new normal of the workplace. We are in a remote environment still. We are not talking about people. That means we have still to continue to do the same and even much more intimacy with customer and intimacy with supplier, with having people remotely, with having audit of suppliers virtually. So how you qualify new sources of supply? By doing audit. So this is the volatility has not only on price or lead time, but also on relationships.
And have you had to reorganize to factor that in?
Exactly. So to really get the manufacturing global footprint thought process with where you need to be when. So this is, again, agility.
Yeah.
So, and if we go now that to the level which actions we have taken, it's about the principle of CART. C-A-R-T means continuity. A is for agility, R for resilience, and T for transparency. So Technicolor has really, since 2 years, applied those principles.
I guess the next thing to go from here is with the market transition from a focus on supply distribution to cost with the sort of looming global, I mean, I have to mention the R word, the looming possible recession, changing the need for companies to manage this balancing act. Rajesh, maybe get your thoughts on that, really.
Yeah, it's, I think the supply chain and procurement organizations have been on that roller coaster ride for quite a bit.
Yeah.
And as we know, for the last couple of years, there's been intense focus on, managing the supply, right? And reduce the disruption. So a lot of companies have entered into long-term contracts to secure capacity and get ahead of the competition and preserve revenue. And all of a sudden, they have to hit the brakes because you're beginning to see slowdown in demand associated with a potential recession here. You also have the situation where companies have been really struggling to get workforce in place. They've been hiring, wherever they can, et cetera. And who knows, and we're already seeing this, there's layoffs that have started as well, right, in the environment that's coming through. Also, you've seen companies, who are focused on managing inflation and accepting whatever price that just to secure supply, to now having to go after cost reductions at a very aggressive pace. So that transition is the challenge, because now you'll have to balance both those elements. Disruption is not completely going to go away, and certain inflation will not go away, but you also need cost reductions, you also need to mitigate liability, et cetera. This is where I think, the combination of both the human part of it, as well as using technology to essentially start making some of those decisions and trade-offs and making those calls become really, really important. It's going to be a pretty intense ride for the next year as well on the other side of slowing demand.
Well, E, do you agree with that? Do you think it's going to be a sort of hairy ride with an emphasis on cost?
Yeah, I think the paradigm of cost versus supplies has always existed. It's just that now the third dimension is risk.
Yeah.
Okay, so how you balance risk, cost, and supply. And this awareness of risk is not only about when the risk is visible, is how you anticipate that this risk will arrive and what action plan you have to mitigate that risk. So that's the really third dimension that has been really visible over the last few years.
Exposed, yeah. Absolutely.
So this is the shift, this is the transition.
It's that exposure that I actually wanted to do a follow-up question with you both, really. This idea of me not being an expert in it, this idea of forced cost reductions and dealing with people within your organizations to say like, where they feel there are obvious cost cuttings to be made, but actually that actually in the long run it will cost more if you do things that way. How prevalent is that, and what sort of things do boards and excos and executive committees pressure you to make those savings in where really they shouldn't be at all, actually?
So, of course, traditionally our category managers are developing category strategies, are driving cost reductions, and are, of course, developing supply base. But we realized that it was not enough. So to do that, we have to really leverage technology and intelligence in our intelligent platform. And we are using intelligent platform to provide in real time, first, accuracy in forecast to demand supply planning. Then making sure that the price fluctuations that we see on the market are integrated in our cost model. So we are really proliferating with our supply base the cost models, the levers of lean manufacturing, where this part should be produced when, to deliver the right product at the right time. And we can do that only with intelligence. That means having those scenarios modelized in the system and having category managers to really come proactively, go to the engineering at the very level of the design stage and tell them, guys, we are not selecting the right part. We are not selecting the right suppliers. We need to review the way we are going to offer to the customer this new product with this new bid. So we are really early stage involved because we have already analyzed the different scenario with multi-layers patterns that have said, if you were selecting this supplier and this component, we would have a risk that we can predict now in 50 weeks or in 1 year, okay? So this is where really the technology has given category managers, again, price fluctuations, real-time inventory, real-time forecast to demand from customer to supplier, including tier 1 and tier 2, and driving innovation by having a dual source qualification at each level of the design.
And so these are areas where we can. Are there other things that companies can do? This is where we get the meat, really, of this conversation. But these other things that companies can do to get ahead of this new normal of volatility, as well as those. Is it like this idea of ironing out, sort of like with your experience on having, the idea to respond to changes within the supply chain that you just mentioned? Is there other things as well, or? I mean, Jesh, you talked about a proactive analysis rather than reactive. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about that, rather than waiting for things to happen, actually trying to predict beforehand.
So, based on different organizations that have approached this differently, we've seen there's certain things that drive competitive advantage for companies when they're managing the resiliency challenge. The first piece is you can't predict everything, every issue that may happen. So having a rapid response capability at scale where you're able to get the insight quickly, so you have a sensing function that's going to process that information and say, here's a potential impact to your portfolio, and here's the alternates, whether it's an alternate supplier, alternate part, or same supplier, same part, but a way to kind of mitigate the risk, and taking that action all happening together in one place really builds that agility and the rapid response. Everybody gets events within a few hours, but that doesn't give you competitive advantage. What gives you competitive advantage is how you go from that event to the action aspect, the speed at which you do that to get in front of the line. And so that's one piece, right? That's rapid response. But the real competitive advantage is how do you do things proactively, and there's two dimensions to it, which these companies have really done well. The first one is around, independent of an event, having a good mapping of where the potential risk is. And essentially working that in terms of mitigating it, whether it's a financial issue, geographical concentration, single sourcing, et cetera, working that independent of an event and trying to mitigate that is one piece that is very key. But the main thing that really impacts the pipeline is when you're designing a new product, that is the time upstream that you really want to influence part choice, supplier choice, such that it takes into account, that for this specific product you are building for, resiliency. And if you don't do that effectively, you're going to have the tail wagging the dog again once that goes into production. And so that's the opportunity in front of companies to get to the next level of being prepared.
Before we, Eve, I want to ask you about data, but we've got a lot of questions on the Slido app, and we're not going to have time for all of them. So if you take a look at it and upvote the ones you want to prefer to be answered, we'll go with the ones that are most popular. Eve, we talked a lot about, when we spoke before, about the huge amount of data available. And it's common in other industries as well, where they just don't know what to do with all the data. Lead time, components, pricing, etc. So some advice on how to manage this, and how do you even find the time to analyze this?
No, so if we were doing that manually, of course we would not have time and we would not have the capacity to integrate millions of data, internal data and external data. So the power of intelligence is really to integrate the third-party data. You are always, all the buyers today receive alerts. We talked about that this morning, notification from industry trends, market update about raw material increase or plant shutdown in whatever Korea. So what do you do with this information? So the question is how you educate your category managers and your procurement professionals to get the insights of the data with just in a very, very, fast manner to quickly act and to take this advantage on the innovation side. So it's really about reducing the time to market. If your category managers take 6 months to negotiate a part that your competition has already finalized the agreement, you're already done. We talked about that this morning many times. Obsolescence and of the reactivity of the market between the supply and the demand. So we need to be very agile, very flexible, have solution ready to move production parts to plant A to plant B, Europe to Asia to America, and of course take into considerations that pricing is not the only factor, it's all the total cost. And this total cost comes with other lean manufacturing levers. So that's why we didn't just went with the data on price. We took data on inventory, took data on price, took data on geopolitical, on, of course, on any financial assessment that comes into the equation about weighting and scoring to have really an immediate actionable plan.
I'm conscious of running out of time. Jesh, I just want to quickly ask you, with the obvious benefits of a proactive approach and managing out the volatility, I want to ask you very quickly, if you could, why aren't more companies doing something in order to gain a competitive advantage over these factors?
I think if I take the example of the Ukraine war, and going into the war, and you stacked up the conventional weaponry that Russia had over Ukraine, you would say, okay, it's a matter of days that they're going to win the war. But that didn't happen, even if you had that technology. So there's many companies out there exhibiting. It's not just about, hey, taking a set of technology and putting it in place and expecting things to work and solve all their problems. It really comes down to the people. And when I talk about people, it's around how are they motivated, how are they enabled to use these technologies, and how are they led, from the top in driving the digital transformation that is going to change the game. And that's where we have the problem. The existential problem that's separating this is the pace of innovation is much faster than the pace of adoption. And so unless you figure out how that's going to be accelerated, technology is, literally 3 years ago, if it's fully adopted, it provides much more value than the incremental, innovation that's happened since then. And so my feedback there is that investment in the people, in the transformation, in the aggressive push to include in business process, et cetera, which, Eve spends a lot of time on that area, is absolutely critical for success in this area.
Let's go to the questions, because there's some really popular. There's loads of them. You'll be pleased to hear. The most popular one, Eve. Let's start with you on this one. How can we get true transparency in supply chains, understanding tier 2 and tier 3 supply sources, in order to truly understand and reduce risk in supply?
How we get true transparency?
True transparency.
It's integration end-to-end of the supply chain visibility with access and collaboration side on the systems from the customer to the operator, from the operator to the tier 1 suppliers and to the tier 1 to the even foundry. So we are asking really, even let's say tomorrow you have the huge foundry that is providing all the telecommunication industry, you have to get where it's going to be shipped from, at which foundry is going to be used. So those data are critical. If you don't know your long lead time component, if you don't monitor daily those information, you cannot predict the best scenario for your customer. So that's why leveraging the platform of intelligence, of cognitive supply chain is critical to that mission.
Jesh, there's one here which I really like, which is relevant to what we just spoke about, actually. Savings usually is a procurement priority. How then can the value of procurement show, how then will the value of procurement should be measured in the case of innovations, if it's all about savings?
Yeah, that's a great question. If you think about the new measure in many companies, they're looking at a dimension of, how much savings, how much have you moved the needle on risk, and how much have you moved the needle on ESG, right? So 3 big buckets of measurement and on performance, and also on a day-to-day basis, figuring out how you're moving the needle from an execution standpoint on those areas. So I think a big part of the innovation, and innovation comes from many different ways. So there's a part of innovation which you can justify directly saying that this is driving X dollars in savings. as a result, or whether it's transactional automation, to decision-making or faster response to events, et cetera. And most of these things, can come with a business case, or a business case can be developed associated with that innovation and be demonstrated with that execution of it as well. And go ahead.
Final question for both of you. Thank you very much for your questions. I'm so sorry we couldn't get through them. I flipped to the app after we were going through the questions, and there's loads there. So well done, guys. The last question, though, for both of you, as we're out of time, I think is a relevant one, is you've both talked about the importance of agility and how vital that is, not only in the new volatility, but it was before anyway. It's accelerated that process. So it's all very well talking about it, but how do you establish agility of supply chain? Are there new types of agreements? If so, can you give some examples? That's a question from the floor.
So agility of supply chain is really by being, again, is translated by flexibility. So that means have always continuity of supply everywhere. Have a ready location for any other disruption that could happen. Could be a big disruption like COVID, or a very minor disruption like a component shortage. Sometimes you use 1% of the component that create you the huge shortages. So you have to get that agility to find, again, dual source, to make sure that your executive level are aware that the risk is measured at concept of the product, not later. So this agility is, again, translated by flexibility, manufacturing operations ready, and suppliers always here to get you a part.
Rajesh.
Yeah, so I'll just add to what he was mentioning there. I think there's a real opportunity, and some of the companies that we work with are doing this well, which is in the new product introduction, before you award a new product to a specific contract manufacturer, ODM, or supplier, there's agreements that you can put in place which drive some of that flexibility and expectations from them, right? So which is, here's the amount of stock that you should carry, or here's the level of time for recovery, if there's a disruption event, et cetera. These are things that can be done upfront because that's where you have the most amount of leverage with those set of suppliers and so on. And doing that as part of the DNA becomes really critical, so that, the pipeline at the end of it, over a few years, you're in a much better place as a result, and have agility in the supply chain as well.
Start of the negotiations has to be established right from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's all we've got time for. Thank you so much for your questions, and please give a round of applause to our panel, Rajesh and Eve. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Cheers.